join me for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the school board meeting for the School Town of Speedway, April 12th, 2016. We'll be working from an agenda that's posted in the back of the room. We have 12 items on this agenda, and the first item is to approve the minutes from March 12, 2016.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Bickle. Thank you, Laura. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from March 12, 2016. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries 4-0.
March 8th. 5 weeks ago.
I know, but it says here the 12th.
That was my mistake.
I was reading, sorry.
My mistake.
March the 8th. The minutes were from March the 8th. We still want to approve
We
these?
do.
Okay.
We should have caught that though. Darn it.
Very good.
He actually caught 2 things. He got his packet early, but he missed that, so we'll have to let the proofreader of dissertations know. Let us know.
All right. Is this okay for me to close these?
Don't run with it.
And that's our sign. Thank you. Item 2, present the preliminary report regarding the 2016 summer school program.
Ms. Mock.
Our summer school program will be similar to last year. We perhaps might have some students who need some iRead remediation, so that's one of our classes that we'll offer. So usually we only need just a couple of teachers for that based on how many students pass the iRead in the spring. And then we'll have, at elementary, we'll have regular remediation classes in reading and math. And then enrichment, we offer at least one per school, and then it just depends on registration, and students, again, can choose which school they want to go to based on what they want to study. So we have anywhere from art to science to robotics for them, so the registration for that will begin soon. Then at the junior high, they'll again do remediation in math and language arts. Amy Cronin will do her amazing band program where they turn into magicians overnight. And then a new thing at the junior high, we're going to try an enrichment course there. It's actually based on just strengthening the students physically. So we're going to offer it to we'd like to offer it to 6th graders so that they can kind of acclimate themselves to the building prior to being junior high students, and then those students who are already at the junior high. So it'll be up to 40 hours they're working on their registration after you all approve the preliminary report. And then at the high school, we're going to go back to a more traditional English course where kids are actually not working online as much, but working with the teacher with some online. And then the Play-Doh lab will be available for credit recovery for any of the subjects that they need to finish up the course. They'll have band again and physical conditioning. And then our PE this time, we anticipate that we will only have about 20 students who will take advantage of the PE course this time because of what we offer at the junior high and then the number of credits they need. So we're going to do an Indiana online with that and see how that goes. It sounds strange to offer PE online, but I'm on the steering committee on IOA at the CISC, and nothing but great things are said about that course. So they do have to take some data points on their heart rate and all of that to participate in that. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. And then, of course, students will have opportunity through CISC for driver's ed, and there's information about that in the high school office. And then our swim program will be, again, offered here at the high school. We lengthen the hours just a little bit. They put together a registration form for that, but that will be offered through the Parks Department, and the amount there you see that would not exceed that amount. Do you have any questions about what we'd like to offer?
This is just
There's really no action on this. When we'll come to you for action in May, we'll ask you to authorize that we move ahead with summer school contracts. And then in June, when we actually know the costs and have the contracts, we'll ask you to approve those. One key thing, because I'm a big proponent of summer PE. We're in a transition year because we believe by next year we can start to offer high school PE at the junior high school level. So we have these students in this in-between year. IOA works for that for us. And so, but make no mistake, we hope to have high school physical education credit at least as a full-fledged option for our junior high students so they can open up a period in their high school schedule.
So from at that point, then replacing the summer, not doing summer anymore because they're doing it to junior high?
We're going to have to see what demand says. We think we have the potential to probably service those students. For those students who don't necessarily want to open up a credit, then there's not a big advantage coming in the summer. In fact, I'm not sure they'd be motivated. But those who are highly motivated, we get it. We just have this one in-between year. And a lot depends on what kind of program we can offer. But the Online Academy offers us a reasonable way. Actually, if we're really only hearing from about 20 students right now. It's actually less expensive to run it on IOA than it is to hire a teacher for only 20 students. I'd like to get 30 in PE. So it's different. It's not exactly, we work so hard to get it to where it is, it's kind of hard, but.
We also have a lot of students who are doing an overseas trip
Yeah.
this year, so
Yeah,
that wouldn't fit in their schedule for summer.
Item 3, to approve funding for recreation program administered by the Speedway Parks and Recreation Department.
And this is really a two-parter. We are asking you to approve approximately $6,000 for the parks to run the summer swim program. They have to know that that's coming to employ lifeguards. And last year, you took an unprecedented but highly respected and appreciated step of supporting the parks and recreation programs in the summer. That was well received. I would suggest that you make the same commitment. So what I'm recommending is you authorize up to $6,000 for summer swimming and up to $15,000 for summer parks and recreation. As you did last year, I can tell you we did build the budget so you would have that option, but we didn't ask you to approve it until we saw the documentation for it. So that's the recommendation.
Mr. Smith?
I'll move that we approve the funding for the recreation program administered by Parks and Recreation, including swimming.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bickle. We have a motion and a second to approve the funding recreation program administered by Speedway Parks and Recreation Department. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries 4-0. We don't need that. Item 4, present draft policy regarding internal controls.
And oftentimes, as the State Board of Accounts has come to audit, I've shared with you that my philosophy throughout my career is that the State Board of Accounts is an educational institution. They teach us how to do things. One of their key points of emphasis 2 years ago in their audit was internal control. They only come to audit every 2 years. They recognize that we handle $11 million a year. So in between those audits, there's time that you could have some pretty significant loss of funding. And so they've come up with the State Board of Accounts, SBOA, internal controls and a guide for managers. And they've said, we want you to pay attention to those. Well, I'm not sure enough people did. We started immediately. For example, every fund deposited every month, the treasurer reconciles the amount deposited and I reconcile the amount on paper that we have in. And we initial and exchange copies. Every deposit that's made is checked by 2 people. These are all suggestions of the State Board of Accounts, and we believe our books are as good. But I can't say what, for whatever reason, the state has said a school board has to have a policy saying they expect internal control. I feel very comfortable. This is a draft of policy from the School Boards Association. It says that, for example, this is built for any school corporation. Training shall be provided on internal control standards and procedures to all school employees. Well, the treasurer and I train each other, as well as this is something we do regularly. But I always like to, we don't have to, this policy needs to be adopted, or some policy, not specifically this one, by July 1. But I always like to bring you a draft of policy to go through, and since we have the benefit of counsel on our board, it never hurts to get this in Ms. DeGay's hands and give her a little time, because just because this is what another attorney drafted doesn't mean it's absolutely right. So I'd ask all of you to take a look at this over the coming 30 days, and I'd ask Ms. DeGay to look at it carefully. And by next month, we'll be able to come back with a claim.
Does anyone have any questions on this right now? We'll move to item 5, present draft policy regarding bad debts.
Again, a policy that's required. Now, you might remember we started doing this 2 years ago. It happens generally in the first meeting, or the first meeting in June, or perhaps July, where I bring you a listing. Bad debts almost exclusively come in 2 places, but almost exclusively in lunch. Because a student will come, they will charge lunch. We're not going to not feed kids. We're just not. We're going to feed them. Occasionally they get behind by a few dollars, they move away. It will cost more to turn into a collection agency to $7 to collect $2.50. So by the end of the year, we generally have, especially at the elementary school, $20 or $30 worth of bad debts at each school. We combine those and we ask you to simply write off. I think the number has somewhere been around $100, as opposed to attempt to go out and find and locate people who are no longer in the district. So this is a policy where you direct us to collect those bad debts, but if we can't, that you have to approve them being written off. Likewise, you expect us to refund any money to anyone we can. Because prior to this, quite frankly, the overpays that people left with pretty much balanced this out. But now, and that's the right thing to do. So again, policy that I'd ask you to look at over the next month, and we can work to make sure that we don't, as I've been taught many times, the worst thing we can do is say something incorrectly that we regret later. Better to have not say something we'll do.
Is there any question or discussion on this? We'll move to item 6, present a resolution regarding receipt of grants.
And this is a resolution that really came to the forefront for me in the last, we had 5 weeks between board meetings. And just about 3 days after our last board meeting, Patty, was it 3 elementary schools that got early literacy grants?
Yes.
From the state? And these are grants devised to receive funds to promote literacy. And for the first time, it was not atypical for me to simply sign that grant on your behalf. And you can remember times I've come to the next board meeting and said I've asked the board to approve this retroactively. If you ever didn't want to take the money, and it's real easy, it's not like we start spending it. But they then asked me, if the superintendent's going to sign, he has to have a resolution from the board authorizing the superintendent to sign. And they had a deadline of March 31, and I knew you weren't meeting it yet. I went ahead and signed, and they're waiting for, now, they've accepted that. But the question is, they'll accept this, and if you pass this resolution, I will send it also. If not, we'll still eventually bring the grant back when we receive the funds. So the long and short of this is, your counsel, Jeff McDermott, wrote this resolution, which would essentially designate the superintendent, and in his case, the superintendent by name, so that if in a future board or a future superintendent would have to review this and decide whether it goes on or not. But they would authorize saying the superintendent can sign for a grant of a certain amount of money with the understanding that within 30 days it would come for board action. Now, what amount of funding? We get most of the grants we receive are somewhere less than $100,000. We do occasionally get the Title I grant, can be
Up to $500,000.
up to about $500,000. This literally becomes a piece of paper that when I sign to accept a grant, I put a copy in. And I wanted to get this into you. We don't have to by any means pass this tonight. because we're still waiting on the early literacy things to come back to us. But if you want to authorize me to sign for your grants and then bring them to you for retroactive approval, which is really the practice we followed, this resolution does.
But assuming there's no opposition, why wouldn't we pass it tonight? So that between now and the next board meeting, it won't fall in the same thing.
Exactly. You can. I just these kind of matters, I like to give you a lot of time and a lot of headway because we haven't done anything like this before. And so I'm not saying that I'm not worthy of your trust. I would suggest to you that if you filled in an amount of $100,000 or less, that would be reasonable. We're always going to have time.
Fill that blank in.
Yeah, that blank, you'd have to determine the amount. You'd have to make a motion and go ahead and pass it with that amount. The key thing is that even though I signed for this, within 30 days, we're still going to come back to the board and say, accept this.
Laura?
I have 3 questions. One is, to me it seems as if the resolution regarding the receipt of grants doesn't totally match up with this document because nothing in this document limits it to grants. Does it? Proposed agreements, execution of proposed agreements, execute proposed agreements. And so I don't know if I'm just missing it, but that's one question I have, which is...
My best guess is when they drafted this, they perceive grants and agreements to be synonymous, and I can check with Jeff on that. That's my guess. I didn't catch that or ask.
He can't think they're synonymous because
Okay.
agreements means a million
Contracts,
things. Yes,
yeah.
right? And so whether we care about that difference or not, whether you care about that difference or not, that's one question. The second question is, does my reading of this document is that not that you are authorized to execute best judgment, to respond or execute, which you're in amount of, and so not that the amount has to be right and then you are required to have it approved, but that it must be the type of agreement that exceeds or is under the amount and the agreement requires approval. And is that what we mean for this to say?
I think, here's what I think, because I'm not sure I understood my 2 choices, but bear with me.
Okay.
I believe what we're doing here is saying when something's timely and needs to be signed, that I'm authorized to sign and accept that, which then I can send that back and say start the process. But within 30 days of receiving it, which we're always going to have a board meeting. Well, we can occasionally have a board meeting beyond 30 days because occasionally we have 5 weeks. And it might be better to say 40 days there just to be sure, because the difference between March 8th and today was 35 days.
Right.
Is saying you can authorize it, you can go and get it going, but it still has to come to the board for their acknowledgement and receipt. I think the key is that they're wanting to make, grants are not like state funding that come through in a specific way. They can be unique, and they want to make sure that the board, this is kind of like one of those internal controls. We know this money's coming, and so we can ask questions about it. I think, which require execution of response within 30
So the
days.
agreements are in an amount of X or less, and the agreements require execution or response within 40 days or less. And that would make sense, because here's this agreement, it has to be executed, we're not going to meet during that time frame, and so you can't, right?
Right.
You can't wait till the next board meeting, so the agreement has to be executed within a time frame that doesn't let you get to the next board meeting.
Right.
Okay, so that's what this says.
That's why he says agreements.
Yeah, but we need to clean that up, whether it's a grant or an agreement, and make sure.
I think so. I don't really care. I would authorize you to execute agreements, but if this document is supposed to be about grants and you want to, then I don't know that it is.
Now, I perceive to be about grants specifically. That's why I asked, because grants tend to have these kind of timeframes. Agreements don't. I've made many agreements with people on your behalf and then brought them later because I never make an agreement. But I think this is grant specific, and I think this is to say whatever the granting agency is, the person who signed has that authority, but the board, the governing body, will still will still confirm and ratify after the point. So I feel like it's grant specific. I do think that we probably ought to say 35 days at minimum, because it could be 35 days between board meetings. Having said all that, and again, this isn't going to happen this month, as much as I appreciate it. Let me work with Jeff and get this, and then next month we have it in pretty clean format.
Yeah.
These three
I'm
things.
sure it'll be, I think that would be, I would just want him, who drafted this, to know, to be asked and give an answer to why such loose language for such a specific thing.
And I think probably the fault in that was not my explaining it. Well, this was a phone conversation and his shot at it.
Sure.
But I think we can without any problem. And again, if you want that to just say the superintendent rather than my name specifically, we can do that so that it could live on in the future. That was the $100,000 to me is even that sounds like a big number to me. I don't want to sign too much more of mine. I don't want to commit to taking money and then you guys say no.
What are the odds?
It's better than me committing to paying money and giving it away.
That would be a different, that would be a different resolution.
The odds are.
And I guess so my point 3 was that I kind of feel like if we have grants that exceed that, then we should have a number that fits the grant.
100%.
So if grants go to $500,000, then it should be, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, well, I think we did have a Title I grant that was over $500,000 about 7 or 8 years ago, but it has been, but that would be, and that's the only other big grant we get is we get in small parts and you approve the money for the food service grant I can't think of a grant that's hit, so $500,000 could also be reasonable. Again, this is exactly why I like to bring these in a timely fashion so that we have time to look at them and have a shot at making them.
Is there any other discussion on this?
Item 7, present contract for consulting services regarding autism.
And see, this was not a contract that needed to be authorized within 30 days. Our Director of Special Education, Ms. Andrea McIntosh, has recommended that we consider contracting and entering into contract with a second provider of services to help with our students, specifically with autism. The rationale is that this gives us 2 options, more timely services for the students. My recommendation is that you authorize the execution. It is good because we have another 7 weeks of school that we can see how this works. And like anything, I like having 2 agreements and 2 providers in case one ever walks away.
And so the rate is comparable?
Rates comparable.
Laura?
I move that we authorize execution of the independent contractor agreement for behavior consultant services regarding autism.
Thank you.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the contract for consulting services regarding autism. Are there any questions? All those in favor? Motion carries 4-0. Acknowledgement of grants received. Item 8.
And the recommendation is that you'd accept by consensus $157,027.02. But interestingly, you see Title I there for $25,000. Title I comes one at a time. We have to execute the contract. It comes a month at a time. It actually comes with whatever we spend. But this is a date or grant system where you see just about every one of those grants are federal or state. Although look at the top, high school athletic boosters again are supported. So absent your objection?
Thanks to all of them. Item 9 is resignations.
And we recommend that you accept 3 resignations. Miss Liz Pointer, who has been a wonderful teacher for us, has gone ahead and decided to follow a spouse who's a surgeon in Philadelphia. It will be a genuine loss, although she has been on leave, maternity leave. Mr. Robert Garcia is tendered resignation as a science teacher at the end of this year. And very late in the day, last week, we received a resignation from one of our custodians, Mr. Gerald States. And I'd recommend you accept all resignations as submitted.
Tom?
I'll move that we accept the resignation of Liz Pointer, Robert Garcia, and Gerald States, recommended by the superintendent.
Thank you. Luke? Luke's the second. Do we have any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries 4-0. That's a nice letter. By
Yes, I was going to say.
Ms. Box's short appointment recommendations, you mind if I just go ahead with your work?
Absolutely.
Item 10, employment recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. President. I'll get ahead of you. I'll steal her work. This is just another typical day. We have 3 employment recommendations. We're recommending Miss Elizabeth Milton to be a cafeteria worker. She'd be assigned to Allison Elementary for 4 hours a day. Miss Carmen Allen left us. Mr. Carl Fenters, we're recommending as a high school assistant softball coach. You can see he has a very long resume working with high school softball. And we're going to recommend that Mr. Glenn A. Curtis be a volunteer, a junior high assistant softball coach.
What's the board's pleasure?
I'll move that we employ Elizabeth Milton as an Allison Elementary School cafeteria employee, Mr. Carl Fenters as high school assistant softball, Mr. Glenn Curtis as junior high assistant softball coaches.
Luke, we have a second? We have a motion and a second to approve the recommendations for employment as presented. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries 4-0. Item 11 is the recognition of visitors. Is there any other discussion? Then we will sign claims.